My wedding dress cost $4,000. My bouquet was made of white peonies flown in from Holland. My reception hall overlooked the lake at sunset. And out of 42 family members invited, exactly 0 showed up. Not my mother. Not my father. Not one aunt, one uncle, one cousin. They were 40 minutes away, at my little sister's engagement party, eating a cake shaped like a diamond ring, toasting to a wedding that hadn't even been planned yet, while mine was actually happening. I stood at the altar in a room full of my fiancé's family and my 3 friends from college, and I smiled so hard my face hurt because I refused to let $300 an hour in photography catch me crying. 6 weeks later, my father sent me a text message at 2 a.m. 4 sentences. And those 4 sentences didn't just explain what happened that day. They blew my entire family apart. If you've ever been the daughter who tried too hard for people who never noticed, stay with me to the end, because what my father confessed changed how I see my whole childhood, and it's going to change how you see yours too. My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the reliable one. You know the type. The kid who got straight A's without anyone checking her homework. The kid who worked 2 jobs through college so her parents wouldn't have to co-sign a loan. The kid who remembered everyone's birthday, drove 3 hours home for every Thanksgiving, and never, not once, asked for anything extra. And then there was my sister, Madison. 2 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, the sun in our family rose and set around her. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because it's simply true. And it took me 29 years and 1 catastrophic wedding day to admit it out loud. Madison got a car for her 16th birthday, a black Jetta with a bow on it in our driveway, filmed and posted online with the caption, "Our baby girl is growing up." I got my license the same year and drove our mom's 12-year-old minivan to school, the one with the sticky passenger door, because you're more responsible, Claire, you don't need anything flashy. When Madison struggled in college, and she struggled a lot, my parents drove up every single weekend with groceries, cash, and pep talks. When I struggled, during my 2nd year, working 30 hours a week on top of a full course load, surviving on ramen and stress, nobody drove up. Nobody called to check in. I called home crying once, actually crying, and my mother said, "Well, Claire, you've always been the strong one. You'll figure it out. You've always been the strong one." If you have ever heard that sentence from a parent, you already know it isn't a compliment. It's a job description. It means, we've decided you don't need us, so we're not going to give you anything, and if you fall apart, that's on you. I built my whole adult life around not needing them. I got a good job in finance. I saved aggressively. I met Daniel, kind, steady, unimpressed by drama, and after 4 years together, he proposed on a hiking trail in October, with the leaves just starting to turn, and I said yes so fast I embarrassed myself. I called my mother that same night, giddy, practically vibrating. "That's wonderful, sweetie," she said. And then, without missing a beat, you'll never guess, David proposed to Madison last week too. Isn't that just perfect, you girls getting engaged practically at the same time? I remember standing in my kitchen, phone against my ear, waiting for her to ask literally anything about my proposal. The ring. The trail. How Daniel had asked. Nothing. She spent the next 20 minutes describing Madison's ring, a cushion-cut diamond, the kind you see in magazines, and how David had rented out a rooftop restaurant and hired a string quartet. I said, "That's so exciting, Mom," and I meant it mostly. I loved my sister. Complicated as things were, I never wanted anything bad for her. I just wanted, for once, to matter as much as she did. I should have known right then exactly how this was going to go. Daniel and I set our wedding date first, June 14th, a Saturday, booked 14 months in advance at a lakeside venue I'd dreamed about since I was 22 years old. I put down the deposit myself with my own savings because I didn't want to owe anyone anything, and because some small, quiet part of me already suspected I might need to do this without much help. 3 months later, my mother called with news. Madison and David had decided to throw a big engagement party, a real celebration, Claire, the kind we never really did for you and Daniel, and they'd found the perfect venue. June 14th. Same day as my wedding. I remember laughing, actually laughing, because surely this was a mistake. Mom, that's my wedding date. I know, honey, but the venue only had that Saturday open for the next 8 months, and Madison's just devastated, and honestly, an engagement party is only a few hours. It's not like it's a whole wedding. Can't people just come to both? Your reception isn't until 6, right? The party's from 1 to 4. The venue was 40 minutes from mine, in the opposite direction of my ceremony start time. I told her, as calmly as I possibly could, that it wasn't physically possible for people to attend both, and that I needed my family at my wedding, not filtering in late, sunburned and half-drunk from a party, missing my vows. She sighed. The sigh I'd heard my entire life. The sigh that meant I was being difficult. Claire, you've always been so sensitive about this stuff. Nobody's trying to take away from your day. It's just, this is Madison's first, well, real moment. You know how anxious she gets. Can you just be the bigger person here? Be the bigger person. As if attending my own wedding required generosity on my part. I asked her, point blank, to talk to Madison about moving the party. She said she would. She never did. Over the following months, I watched, almost like an outside observer, as my family quietly, steadily, made their choice. My Aunt Roberta texted asking if the wedding thing could maybe move to a Friday, since everyone's already committed to Madison Saturday. My cousin Ellie asked if I'd mind if she skipped my ceremony and just came to the reception, since she really didn't want to miss any of Maddie's party. For my sister's engagement celebration. Not even her wedding. Her engagement party. I brought it up to my mother one final time in April, 2 months before the date. I sat her down. I kept my voice level and I said, Mom, I need you to understand, if you all go to Madison's party instead of my wedding, I will remember this for the rest of my life. This isn't a small thing to me. She looked at me, I remember this so clearly, with this expression of mild, patient exasperation, like I was a toddler having a tantrum about bedtime. Claire, honey, you're being a little dramatic. You're both our daughters. Nobody is choosing anyone. But that was exactly the lie sitting underneath the whole thing. Because when the day actually came, somebody did choose. And it wasn't me. June 14th arrived warm and clear, the kind of golden June day wedding planners dream about. I remember standing in the bridal suite at 2 p.m., getting my makeup finished, and asking my wedding coordinator, Priya, if she'd heard anything from the guest coordinator about family arrivals. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before she even opened her mouth. Your mom sighed, we've got about 6 RSVPs checked in so far. Ceremony starts in 90 minutes. Out of 31 people on my mother's side of the guest list, 6 had arrived. By the time I walked down the aisle at 4 p.m., that number hadn't moved. My father wasn't one of the 6. I walked down the aisle to Daniel, past rows of his family and my 3 college friends, past empty white chairs with little ivory bows tied to them, chairs I had specifically reserved for my parents, my sister, my aunts, my uncles, my grandmother. Empty. Every single one. I didn't cry during the ceremony. I want you to understand that, because for months afterward I was almost proud of that fact, the way you're proud of surviving something you shouldn't have had to survive. I said my vows to Daniel with a steady voice, and when he squeezed my hand at the altar, I understood, really understood for the first time, that the family I was choosing that day was worth infinitely more than the one I was born into. But at the reception, during the father-daughter dance slot, a slot I had specifically told the DJ to skip, quietly, an hour before, my chest so tight I could barely form the sentence. I stood at the edge of the dance floor and watched my new father-in-law step in instead, without me even having to ask, because Daniel had told him. That's when I cried. Not sobbing. Just quiet tears sliding down over $400 of professional makeup, while 80 guests who weren't even supposed to be my main support system watched me slow dance with a man who wasn't my father, because my actual father had chosen a diamond-shaped cake 40 minutes away. I found out later, from my cousin Ellie's Instagram story, that my parents arrived at Madison's party at 1:15 p.m. and stayed until almost 5. My mother posted a photo of her and Madison, cheek to cheek, captioned, "So proud of my girl. Best day ever. Best day ever." Posted at 4:52 p.m. 12 minutes after I said I do to an audience of chairs. For 6 weeks after the wedding, I didn't call my parents. I didn't text them. I posted 0 wedding photos on any shared family group chat. When my mother texted, "How was the honeymoon?" with 2 exclamation points, like nothing had happened, I left her on read for 4 days and then sent back one word, "Fine." Madison texted too, at one point, "Hey, sorry things got so chaotic with the dates. Hope your day was still special. Can't wait to see pics." I didn't respond to that one at all. Chaotic with the dates. As if a calendar conflict had orchestrated itself, as if no human being had made a single choice in the entire situation. Daniel wanted me to say something publicly, honestly. He wanted me to call my mother and lay it all out. I couldn't. I was so tired, the specific, bone-deep tired that comes from finally understanding a truth you spent 30 years refusing to look directly at. I wasn't the strong one. I was the convenient one. The one who would always understand, always forgive, always show up, so nobody ever had to worry about losing me. I decided the silence would be my answer. Let them wonder. Let them, for once in their lives, be the ones left waiting. What I didn't expect was for my father to break first. My dad, Robert, is not a talker. In 61 years of life, he has said, "I love you," to me maybe a dozen times, always stiffly, always like the words cost him something physical to produce. He is the kind of man who shows love through oil changes and roof repairs, not conversation. He had said nothing to me on my wedding day, not a call, not a text, not so much as an apology in the group chat. So when my phone buzzed at 2:14 a.m., 6 weeks after the wedding, and I saw his name on the screen, my stomach dropped before I even opened it. Here is what my father wrote, word for word. I've read it so many times I could recite it in my sleep. Asterisk, Claire. I can't sleep. I need to tell you something I should have told you before your wedding, and I'm ashamed that I didn't. Your mother didn't miss your wedding because of a scheduling mix-up. She's known about the date conflict since January and chose Madison's party on purpose. She told me if I went to your ceremony instead of the party, she'd tell Madison I don't love her the way I love you. I was scared of what that would do to this family, and I let you walk down that aisle alone. I'm so sorry. There's more I need to tell you, but not over text. Please call me. Asterisk. I read it 4 times before it fully landed. She told me if I went to your ceremony instead of the party, she'd tell Madison I don't love her the way I love you. I called him. It was 2 in the morning, and I called him immediately, and he picked up on the first ring, like he'd been sitting there with the phone in his hand, waiting. What he told me over the next hour rearranged 29 years of my life. My father told me that my mother has spent decades quietly convinced that Madison was the fragile one, anxious, easily hurt, needing extra protection, while I was cast, from almost the moment I was born, as the resilient one who could absorb neglect without consequence. He said my mother genuinely believed, and still believes, that giving me less was a form of trust, not a form of harm. That withholding attention from me was, in her mind, a compliment to my strength. But then he told me something my mother had never told me at all. He said that back in January, when the date conflict first came up, he had actually pushed back, hard, for him, and told my mother they needed to prioritize my wedding, since it had been booked first. He said my mother had responded by threatening to tell Madison that their father loved Claire more, a phrase she apparently believed would send Madison into some kind of emotional crisis, because Madison, in my mother's eyes, needed to always believe she was the most loved child in order to function. My father chose the peace of the household over standing beside me. And here's the detail that changed everything. The fact my father confessed at nearly 3 in the morning, voice shaking on the other end of the phone. Madison never actually asked for the party to be on my wedding date. My mother booked the venue herself and told Madison the date just worked out that way. Madison, to this day, still believes it was a coincidence. My mother built an entire lie, a whole architecture of manipulation, and used both of her daughters as pieces on a board, telling one daughter a version where nothing was her fault, and telling a father that loyalty to his firstborn would destroy his relationship with his youngest. I sat on my kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, phone against my ear, and I finally understood. This was never really about Madison being spoiled or me being strong. This was about one woman's need for control, dressed up for 30 years as love. I wish I could tell you I confronted my mother the next day in some cinematic showdown. It wasn't like that. It took me almost 3 weeks to be ready to speak to her at all. When I finally did, I didn't yell. I told her, calmly, that my father had told me everything: the venue, the threat, the lie she'd told Madison about a coincidence. I watched her face go through something I genuinely never seen on her before. Not defensiveness, not immediate excuses, but something closer to being caught. She tried, briefly, to reframe it. I was trying to protect this family, Claire. You don't understand how fragile things are with your sister. I understand perfectly, I told her. You decided which daughter's pain was allowed to matter. And you picked wrong for 29 years. I told my sister the truth too, gently, because none of this was ever her fault. Madison cried on the phone with me for almost an hour. She told me she'd always felt guilty, somewhere underneath everything, that things came so easily to her and so hard to me, and she'd never understood why. Finding out our mother had engineered even that guilt, had used Madison's own insecurity as a leash to control our father, broke something in her too. Madison and I are closer now than we've ever been in our lives. We talk every week. She came to our 1-year anniversary dinner, cried through the whole toast, and told Daniel, only half joking, that she was going to make up for 30 years of missed birthdays. My relationship with my mother is different now. Quieter. More distant. I see her a few times a year at arm's length because trust like that doesn't rebuild in a season. It takes years, if it rebuilds at all, and some days I'm honestly not sure it will. My father and I talk more than we ever did before. It's still stiff sometimes, still two people relearning a language neither of us was ever taught to speak fluently. But he shows up now. Actually shows up for dinners, for phone calls, for the small, ordinary moments he spent 30 years missing. He tells me he loves me almost every time we hang up now. It still costs him something to say it. But he says it anyway. I used to think being the strong one in my family was a badge of honor. Now I understand it was a role I was assigned so someone else's comfort could come first, a label placed on me so my absence, my exhaustion, my need, could be quietly ignored for 3 decades. If you've ever been the child who was told you didn't need anything, who was praised for how little space you took up, I want you to hear this clearly. That wasn't a compliment. That was a system, built without your consent, so that someone else's fragility could always come first. You are allowed to need people. You are allowed to expect them to show up. And if they don't, if they choose the easier daughter, the easier son, the easier version of peace, over you, that says everything about them and nothing at all about your worth. My wedding day was the loneliest day of my life. But it was also the day I finally stopped auditioning for a family that had already decided who was going to win. If this story hit close to home for you, tell me in the comments, were you ever the strong one in your family? And if you haven't already, subscribe, because next week I'm telling you what happened when my mother tried to get an invitation to my daughter's first birthday party.